Beaming out across the galaxy, this is where conspiracy on the wild side meets the perspective of a lifetime. This is the Free Zone with your host, Freeman.
Hello and welcome to the Free Zone. Well, folks, schizophrenia is one of those top 10 health problems in this world. You wouldn't believe the amount of people that we find in the establishment. Yet the establishment continues barking up the wrong tree, futilely pushing this chemical imbalance theory, which has many times been proven false. They don't have a solution. They have no cure, but we do. Tonight, we are talking with one of my most beloved guests. He gave me such praise last time. I want to give it right back because Jerry Marzinsky, you received so much love from our last broadcast. It was one of the most raved about shows that we did. It seems that people are very interested in whether or not the schizophrenia is actually a mental disorder or if we're actually dealing with some sort of entities, demons that are plaguing everyone. Now, folks, in case you don't know, Jerry Marzinsky has over 30 years experience working with psychiatric patients in both the Arizona prison system and the psychiatric rehabilitation counselor. At Central State Hospital, he worked there. We're talking 8,000 to 13,000 patients dealing with this. He had 10 years in the prison system, 16 years in the prison system, 10 years as a crisis ER, and 7 years at this state hospital. In all of this time as a licensed mental health practitioner, he still finds time to become a licensed pilot and a scuba diver, and he's an avid explorer of nature and all things that go bump in the night. So please welcome to the Free Zone, Jerry Marzinsky. Wonderful to have you back.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Freeman. I'm not sure I deserve all that praise, but, it's strange to sit here and hear it after, fighting with the system for decades.
Yeah, right.
and being beat down. And it's like, what?
The opposite here, man. They love you. Oh, my God.
That takes me by surprise, too. I didn't know it was that popular. I was just kind of trying to get it out there.
Well, it really was, and I'm not making that up. You can go look at the numbers for yourself, folks. Jerry Marzinsky definitely struck a chord with everyone, and you did, Jerry.
Well, that chord is already out there. We're waiting to be struck. So what's really cool is the people who are tuning into this and hearing this information are the ones who are ready to hear it. They're the ones that are waking up. I've got some friends who are engineers who they can't even conceive of this. I mean, it's just not within their conceptual framework. And the same thing with psychiatry and a lot of psychologists. Spiritual, we're spiritual beings. Without the spirit, the body deteriorates. It just goes, it rots away.
Without a doubt, talking to doctors, you find they know nothing about the true human being. They think of it in these, cut up terms, and humans are just parts of pieces. They don't take into consideration the environment or anything. When you start going to doctors, you find out how little they really know.
Oh, yeah, but they won't tell you that. They'll act like, oh, yeah, we know what this is. You take this thing and it'll make you better. And one thing I've seen that it really upsets me is the whole time I worked at the state hospital and even in the ERs, doing psych crisis in the ERs, is they don't tell the patient the nasty, awful side effects that these drugs have.
Oh man, the list that goes on. Well, let's back up a little bit then. Let's summarize psychiatry a little bit and run through just kind of the history of how we ended up in this conundrum.
Good. Keep me on track because, as Sherry knows, I'll tend to get disorganized.
I will.
Well, where it started is back in the early 1800s, where when people went insane, they would control them with chains and straitjackets, or they beat them senseless, which didn't help any. So Central State Hospital, when I went to work there, they still had these chains hanging from in the basement of the Powell building. And so I remember one of the first cases that they brought into Central State. I went back and investigated the history, and there was a clinical psychologist who worked there in the 1950s. That's just about when drugs started coming in. And he researched the history, and he told of one psychotic patient who they had to bring in chained to a buckboard because he was so violent and dangerous. And what they did is they brought him into the basement of the Powell building, which at that point was the main state hospital back in the 1800s. And they chained him to a rock wall in the basement. And he was so violent and so agitated that he pulled out several of the big boulders that were supporting the building. And when they went down to check on him in the morning, that these things were out of place, and the foundation was in danger of collapsing in that one area.
That's superhuman.
That's superhuman, and that's one thing. I mean, we can get into later, but they do have superhuman strength when they're agitated. And I can tell you about one prisoner who, what he displayed was insane. But I don't want to get into that right now. I mean, the strength that he displayed. If you remind me later, I can tell you about that. But it's an unbelievable story.
I will.
So they moved this guy to another wall, and in the morning, they came down there, and he was calm as a cucumber, and they couldn't figure this. And they said, "Well, you know, what happened?" And basically, what he said is, "I got religion." And he was acting normal. He was acting sane. He wasn't agitated. He wasn't hearing voices. He was back to being normal. So they took him off and made him a trustee. And he worked as a trustee without any more symptoms of psychosis. And then he escaped from the hospital. And when they tracked him down, he had a job and he was working out there, you know, and he was doing fine. And there were no psychotic symptoms. So they wrote that up as like an anomaly. Okay, this thing happened. We can't explain it, but it happened. Okay. So that's where they started out, with chains and straitjackets, dragging them into the psychiatric hospital. And back then they treated them very humanistically. In the Powell building, Dr. Powell, who ran the place, was a very humanistic psychiatrist. And he treated the patients with kindness and attention, and it was like a family atmosphere. But as the hospital grew bigger and bigger and more doctors came in, things began to drastically change. So they were looking for, you know, some way to control these patients. So, you know, Central State not only dealt with psychotic patients, they dealt with all mentally ill, people who were dumped there, casualties from the Civil War. It was like the dumping ground for the state of Georgia. So they were trying to figure out a way to control that population before they had psychiatric drugs. So one of the first things the psychiatrists came up with was something called puking. So you know how you feel after you get sick and you throw up? Well, that's what these guys were doing. They were giving psychotic patients emetics to make them sick and make them throw up. And you remember how you felt after throwing up when you were sick. You know, you didn't feel like doing anything. So they were inducing.
Them so sick that they don't need to worry about them.
That's right. They made them sick for a good period of time by giving them these emetics. And, you know, as long as they were sick, they didn't feel like causing trouble, or, you know, they didn't, and, you know, that's one of their, then they moved also to hot and cold showers. They figured that did some good. And, I don't think it would. It might, you know, the shock might stop the voices for a short period of time, which is probably what happened. But neither one of those had any kind of permanent effect. For females, they came up with douches of Epsom salt, doses of apple cider, and douches of grapefruit juice. So, you know, this is just kind of historically what they were doing. So
This is insane. I mean, every time we talk, Jerry, I'm always thinking the doctors are the lunatics and the patients the sane ones.
oh boy, do I have some statistics for you on that one.
I believe it.
Oh man, you know, I'll just briefly inject it there. You know, the suicide rate of schizophrenics is astronomical. It's 5 to 10 times that of the normal population. So based on that, what would you say about the stability of that population just based on those facts alone?
It wouldn't last long.
Well, they wouldn't be real stable either, I wouldn't think. But the suicide rate for psychiatrists is virtually identical.
Huh.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And higher than virtually every other medical field.
Do you think a lot of these guys get into the field to try and figure themselves out?
Well, I think almost all of us do. You know, all
Right.
of us who went into psychology were, you know, like, what the hell is going on?
Right. I guess you're one of them, right? You got
Yeah,
35
like,
years of the biz.
oh God, I remember abnormal psychology. You know, as I went through every single section, it was like, I got that, I got that, I got that, I got that. I mean, it's
Right.
all there, you know.
We're definitely going to talk about that in the second hour. I got a few questions on that.
All right. So then, you know, you had psychoanalysis and Freud and all these other guys, you know, coming in trying to psychoanalyze these people. And it didn't work real well with schizophrenics. so one psychiatrist reported schizophrenics are particularly adept at antagonizing and disagreeing with the therapist, which interferes with their progress in therapy.
Very true.
And I imagine most of them found that out. So psychoanalysis analysis and counseling, just regular trying to talk reason to them, it wasn't working because what they were doing was totally unreasonable. I mean, they were destroying themselves. They were self-sabotaging. You know, they were doing crazy things that, you know, nobody could explain, that were totally irrational. Your reasoning with them was just out of the question. It just didn't work. Next, they moved to lobotomies. Now, this is, you know, mostly for extreme cases of depression and psychosis. And what they did is they got a metal rod and they stuck it through the eye socket up into the brain, and they scrambled the prefrontal cortex of the brain and destroyed it, physically destroyed it. And that's the reasoning center for the brain. And it also deals with emotions. So once that was scrambled, these guys were, I mean, I've only saw one the whole time I was there, and I went out of my way to meet him. And my gut impression after talking to him was he's not quite human. You know? And when I told that to the writers group that I was about to write about, oh no, you can't say that. That's so cruel. That, you know, that doesn't show you as a professional. I mean, that was my impression. This guy was not quite human anymore. The way he came across, I mean, there was just something drastically missing. He was more of a zombie than he was a human.
And he could still speak, and
he could still speak. You know, he could still kind of reason somewhat, but there's something I just couldn't put my finger on that
right.
that was it was just gone. You know?
Right.
So they did a lot of those, and then they moved to electroshock therapy.
Yeah.
You know, that was in the 50s. And what now? I saw one of these. I don't know if you want me to go into detail about what that looked like, but it was horrendous.
Yeah, we did talk about that a little bit last time.
Okay, so I probably don't need to go into it again. But what it did is it launched these guys into massive convulsions that they had to strap them down, 4-point them so they didn't break their bones, and fill them with a horse needle full of muscle relaxant to keep them from breaking their bones. It was just, you know, like Dr. Frankenstein's lab when I saw this thing. They were doing 3,000 of these a year at Central State Hospital back in the 1950s. And what it would do is it would cause permanent brain damage even after one application, one neurologist told them that. But it was really good at controlling the population. It basically stunned their brain, and they weren't about to cause a lot of trouble while they were stunned. I mean, they were just disoriented, and they had to carry them back to their room, and they just sat there in a daze and didn't cause any trouble for a week or so. And that was used just as much as for punishment as it was for any kind of treatment.
Right.
You know, and it wasn't usually the psychiatrists who were overwhelmed. Their caseloads were in the hundreds, you know, per psychiatrist out there. So basically they were just trying to keep the population down and under control. So 3,000 of these things, and each one shriveled their brain and killed massive numbers of brain cells. And usually it was the attendants, the people who worked the floor, who would recommend to the psychiatrist which patients needed to have their brains shocked, you know, and stunned. So the patients who caused the attendants a great deal of trouble were the first ones put on the line. And they said it was more like a factory where they lined these guys up and they brought them in, then they shocked the devil out of them, and then, you know, carried them back to their room. And it was one after another, and it was like a factory line. Now, one thing it did do is and I found this strange when I first heard about it, but it did get rid of the psychotic voices for a short period of time, maybe days or a week or a couple of weeks. The voices disappeared, but they usually came back. Yeah. So I found that interesting. I didn't know how to account for it. But they were using shock treatment to dumb down the entire psychiatric population. And it seemed like that was their quest, is to dumb these people down and manage them. You know, actually trying to cure them, you know, didn't seem to be a priority. They just kind of wanted to treat the symptoms, and that's all these drugs did.
Of course, we know they're doing much better now.
Oh, yeah. Let me tell you.
Please do.
I'll tell you about the damage some of these things done. Then they moved to insulin shock. Right? So this was the coming of chemicals. And what they did is burned all the sugar out of the patient's body and left them in shock caused by the insulin. You know, it didn't cure anything. You know, all it did was treat the symptoms. You know, so here they were shocked again, and they behaved themselves for a week or so, and then they do it again. You know, in the meantime, you know, while all this is going on, psychiatry is trying to figure out, you know, what's to blame for these mental illnesses. You know, what's to blame for psychosis? The first person they blamed was the mother. It was the mother's fault. She ate the wrong food. You know, she did bad things during pregnancy. She drank alcohol. She did something to cause a bad pregnancy. It was her fault. You know, can you imagine all the guilt that put on the mothers who had, you know, schizophrenic sons? It's their fault. And
Yeah.
here they are telling them this? I mean, for heaven's sake. So when they found no evidence for that, then they went, well, okay, let's blame the genes. It's a genetic factor. You know, it's transmitted by the genes. And you know, the best they could do is say predisposition. They never found the schizophrenia gene. They never will. They couldn't find any evidence for that at all. All right.
Right.
So what they did next, and this is interesting, is back in the pre-50s, the dye industry had some pretty sophisticated labs for researching different dyes that they were using or wanted to use. And they found that some of the compounds that they isolated from the search for dyes actually tranquilized people. And when the drug industry heard of this, they went, this could be useful. So they went and they obtained this research, and they boiled out the chemicals that were responsible for this. And then they started pawning it off to psychiatrists who worked in mental hospitals. And there were 4 classes of mental illness that these drugs treated. And every single one of these drugs was discovered by accident, in most of them in the chemical dye industry. So all this horse bunky that, you know, the pharmaceutical industry is trying to pull over everybody's eyes, that, oh yeah, we spend billions of dollars in researching these things and bringing them to market, and then we have to get it through the FDA, and we have to run all these extensive tests, and it costs billions of dollars to do this. All these drugs were discovered by accident. They did no research whatsoever other than to isolate them. You know? And then they charge astronomical rates for these things. You know? Right now, to keep a schizophrenic sane for 1 month, it's over $700 if you had to buy these things over the counter. You know, in Mexico, without a prescription right now, you can walk into a pharmacy, get those same drugs from the same company for $70 a month. So that shows you how much of a markup these people are making on these drugs. You know,
drugs that are simply come from poison from a dye industry. I mean, we're talking about like colored dyes that were for fabrics and whatnot.
Yes, yes, that's where they were discovered. All 4 major categories, you know, were stumbled upon by accident, and the drug companies went, oh, we can make a fortune on this, because they tranquilize people, and the people who need people tranquilized are the psychiatrists in the big hospitals, and this can make their job much easier. And in fact, it did. You know, no longer did they have to do these raging battles with psychotics and get a team of attendants to kind of wrestle them down and cinch them up into a straitjacket, which caused, you know, some severe injuries on both sides of that one. You know, now they just inject them with a needle or stuff some pills down their throat, and an hour later they're zonked out. You know? So it was real, very handy, you know, for the psych hospitals. So with no proof whatsoever, the drug industry figured, well, these drugs are chemicals, so they must cause or fix some chemical imbalance in the brain. You know, that they just came up with that out of thin air, and they started publishing that. You know,
I've heard so many people, you know, justify their actions by this very thing. Oh, well, I was told I have a chemical imbalance, so you just have to deal with me. You know, I've heard this a number of times. People get this excuse, and just throwing that in as kind of a side note.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like, it's not my fault. I can't take responsibility for my behavior. It's the chemicals that are doing it.
Exactly.
I've got nothing
I got a
to do
chemical
with
imbalance. But where is that chemical imbalance, and what is it? Has anyone ever defined this?
No, they haven't been able to find it. They don't even have a test to measure it. Nothing, no lab work, no EKGs, no MRIs, nothing. There is nothing. They've found nothing. They had a correlation, just like a correlation between, you know, you take these drugs and you get tranquilized. All right. So, you know, when they started this, I was at Central State Hospital, and I was watching what the psychiatrists were doing. You know, and I asked them. I mean, I went up and asked them. I was just curious, like, you know, what causes this? And I got the chemical imbalance theory. You know, the serotonin is out of balance, and some of these other neurotransmitters are out of balance, and these drugs put them back in balance. So I watched what they did, and what they did is they brought the patient in, and they asked them a bunch of questions. You know, you're hearing voices, you're sleeping at night, and they had this list of symptoms that, you know, they generated for psychosis, and if it matched, they'd put them on one of these powerful antipsychotic drugs. But, you know, if it was a chemical brain imbalance, you would think they would be doing some kind of lab work or some kind of test or any kind of measurement to figure out which of the scores of neurotransmitters in the brain were unbalanced.
Right.
So if you're going to fix something, you need to know what you're fixing and how to fix it.
Yeah,
Never.
I mean, if you don't even know what you're fixing, you don't know what to detect, right?
Well,
but hey, we got this dye compound. We can just throw it in them, and it's easier than these. What did you call that? The board. keep them chained up or drugged up. So far, we're looking at a situation where first they were beaten and tortured, and that didn't really work. Then they were just comatose with sugar and then shock therapy. And there's not one moment here where I hear a doctor going, well, I think the problem might be this. It's all about just keeping the doctors cured, right? We're safe from the patients.
Well, yeah, and to keep them away from everybody else. So it's kind of like if you want access to study a clinical population, the average guy just can't walk into a mental hospital and say, hey, I want to study your population. I want to do some tests. I want to do this. I want to do that. They'd be shut down immediately. They wouldn't let them in there. Oh, we can't take the risk. We can't take the responsibility. We don't know what your tests are going to do. We're going to get sued. Maintain the status quo at all costs. They hold on to that chemical imbalance thing, and they just kind of throw it in your face. But there's no evidence whatsoever for it. I never saw them give a test for any kind of chemical imbalance. It was more like a shotgun approach. It's like they have a shotgun loaded with Thorazine and Mellaril and chloropromazine and Lexapro and Librium and Librex, and they'd fire that at the patient and say, okay, try this load, see if that works. Oh, that doesn't work real well. Well, okay, let's switch you to this load. So and it's a trial and error shotgun approach, and never did I see a psychiatrist inform the patient about the awful side effects of these drugs. Now, they found out the hard way, but they were never actually told about them that I witnessed. And even in the ER, I never saw them sit back and tell a patient, well, okay, these are the side effects you can experience. If they complained about the side effects, then they would say, oh, those are just normal side effects. They'll get better with time. You'll adjust to them somewhat, and that is true. But the side effects were awful. And
when I see these commercials, Jerry, and antidepressant medication, and the side effect is suicidal thoughts. Like, if suicidal thoughts are the side effects of an antidepressant, then I'm getting really confused here, Jerry.
Well, that wasn't the only side effect.
I can understand rectal bleeding and all these other things, but to give you something that causes hey, quit smoking and have suicidal thoughts, and
But
please.
There was an article that came out. It's a, let's see, what was it? Oh, it's anxietycenter.com. It's all one word, CENTRE, anxietycenter.com, where they have all this stuff disputing and evidence proving over and over and over and over that the chemical imbalance theory is false, but it's still being taught in universities. And the psychiatrists are still telling patients that this is the case. And one of the things they say, a small percentage of people, approximately 25%, experience benefits from antidepressant medications. But of that group, many still experience symptoms and experience adverse side effects from the medication. So the benefit is negligible at best. And it goes down further. It says, our analysis indicates that there are no specific antidepressant drugs, that most of the short-term effects of antidepressants are shared by many other drugs, and that the long-term drug treatment with antidepressants or any other drugs has not been shown to lead to long-term elevation of mood. We suggest that the term antidepressant should be abandoned. We have proposed an alternative drug-centered model of drug action that is consistent with a demedicalized approach to depression. And then
We'll just call it slightly better instead of antidepressant.
So, as you look through these drugs, I mean, these reactions, emotional reactions that people are experiencing are part of life. There's the ups and downs. There's the good, the bad. There's the bad things drive the good things. Even the voices are part of the whole, as nasty as they are. But what they do is they, if the person was happily insane, and I've seen none, except maybe a catatonic, and I don't know if they're happy. They just seem to bow out. They seem to be rooted in something, and just nothing matters anymore. They just stare into space for hours. But I've never seen a happy psychotic ever. They're all miserable. All of them. So, they go on to say, in view of the mounting evidence against it, after more than 20 years of being told a chemical imbalance in the brain causes mental illness such as anxiety disorders and depression, the theory was finally put to rest when Dr. Ronald Pye, an editor-in-chief emeritus of the Psychiatric Times, stated in July 1911 in the article, "In the past 30 years, I don't believe I have ever heard a knowledgeable, well-trained psychiatrist make such a preposterous claim about chemical imbalance in the brain, except perhaps to mock it. And yes, the chemical imbalance image has been vigorously promoted by some pharmaceutical companies, often to the detriment of our patients' understanding. In truth, the chemical imbalance notion was always a kind of urban legend, never a theory seriously propounded by well-informed psychiatrists."
That was 1911?
No, that was 2011.
Oh, okay.
So that's when it started. It started cracking. And even before then, I mean, they had no proof, but they kept publishing it.
Right.
And it's on all these websites where they, you go to the Lexapro website, you go to the antidepressants website. All of them say chemical imbalance, chemical imbalance. This falsity that drives their billions of dollars a year business.
Right.
With this falsity that these people are correcting some kind of chemical imbalance in their brains that the drug companies have found. And of course, there's some effect with the drugs. You take a major tranquilizer, it's going to knock you on your butt. You're not going to feel like doing anything. You're going to be in la la land for a long time. Now, one thing, there is a one-to-one correspondence with in these antipsychotic drugs is that virtually all of them are major tranquilizers. Right? They tranquilize the voices. The voices don't like them. And I've been told by scores of patients that the voices do not want them to take these medications. And here they are telling people these voices are hallucinations when they run well-defined patterns that are staring psychiatry in the face, and they are ignoring these patterns. They won't even look. Why should we study a hallucination? It's not real. It doesn't exist. These people are insane. They're not hearing things the way the rest of us are. They're in some other world. And that's true. They are in another world, and that world intersects with this world. And if you look at how they think, they're part of the normal curve that all humans belong to. There is an underlying substrate in how people think. And what goes wrong with that is highlighted in fluorescent neon lights with the schizophrenic. If you look at how they think and what is controlling their thinking, a whole new world opens up. You know, nobody in psychiatry or psychology ever asks, where do thoughts come from? Well, they go, oh yeah, they're generated by the brain. Well, have you ever caught one? Have you ever seen what's generating these thoughts? Is there a little homunculus in there that you've captured somehow that you can put under a microscope and see it generating these thoughts? You know, where do they come from? You know, they don't ask those questions. And that's the root of the answer for schizophrenia. You know, those
See, I
thoughts.
would be like you, Jerry. I'd be the guy who wanted to go in and talk to as many of these psychotics as I could to try and get this puzzle. And here you were all alone trying to dig in, and you're having to secretly investigate these people because no one wants to allow you to talk to them and get answers.
Oh yeah, I've been in trouble a number of times for no, I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but when I was at the state hospital, I would do that. I would like, well, you know, I wanted to know what was going on in the heads of these guys, starting with when I first got there. There was one patient, I think I talked about this previously, where, you know, he cut off his penis, a psychotic. And he was on a unit of a friend of mine that I went to graduate school with. And I called up Ed and I said, hey, Ed, go ask this guy why he cut off his penis. And this was after the guy was put back on medications again. And they sewed his penis back on. And then that was the talk of the lunchroom. I mean, the lunchroom was the grapevine for the hospital. Everybody met in the lunchroom, and that's where all the news. This was before the days of computers and cell phones, and you know, all you had was the dial-up phones. And all the news of the hospital news was, they didn't have a hospital newspaper, but everything that was going on would appear in the lunchroom.
Right.
So everybody in the lunchroom was tracking whether the penis would take or not.
Right.
And this went on for weeks. So, you know, like I said, I finally asked Ed. I said, hey, Ed, this guy's on your unit. Go ask him why he cut off his penis. So, you know, that afternoon at dinner, we met, and I said, well, what do you say? And I'm sitting there waiting on pins and needles, and he says, he said he didn't need it. I'm like, oh, okay. So that was the first time, you know. But back
But
to
these doctors, yeah, they're not asking the logical question, and they're completely avoiding the spiritual content of being a human being.
Oh, totally. And not only that, you know, they wouldn't let me ask those questions either. When they found out, I got in trouble. So there was this one schizophrenic guy, I guess you could call him schizoaffective, really. The guy was a brilliant artist, and he was very intelligent. And I bailed him out of trouble a number of times, and was, you know, asking, you know, he was kind of odd, and I was trying to kind of figure out what was going on with him. And he was painting this beautiful picture. It looked like professional artwork with acrylic paints of a it was a watermill on a lake with a forest, and he was doing a great job. And yeah, I would ask him. I got to know this guy pretty well, and I would ask him from time to time, you know, about his voices. And here I saw him start this painting, and I would stop by, you know, once a week or so and check on the progress and talk to this guy. And one day I knew he was about to finish it, so I was in the area and I stopped by his room and knocked on the door, you know, see how he was doing with the painting, and you know, ask him some more questions about his voices. And walked in there, and here were all his acrylics paints laying all over the floor, bleeding. You know, all these tubes all over the place, brushes on the floor. The painting was cockeyed on the easel he had, and he was kind of sitting in his bed, staring at the ceiling. I walked in there and I looked, and he had painted swastikas all over this beautiful painting. And along the top of it, and I still have this thing in the garage, along the top of it, it says a damn good cherry picker. And then there were all these phrases on there. And, I said, why did you do this? I mean, it was beautiful. I mean, it was professional work. He could have sold the thing. I mean, for crying out loud. He said, it was no good. They told me it was no good. It's rotten. Everybody would hate it. And I said, the voices said that? Yeah, the voices said that. I said, well, what did this mean on top where you wrote a damn good cherry picker? He said, well, that's the only compliment my father ever gave me. So, I asked him, I started asking him questions about the voices, and he got very upset. And he said, I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to talk about them. And I could see he was starting to ramp up. And this was after I'd asked him about the voices previously, and they don't want to talk about the voices. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. So one of the big obstacles I had to overcome was why they didn't want to talk about the voices. And there is no good reason for them to. But remind me now, I need to get back to that. But what this guy did was the next day he went to the psychiatrist and he said, hey, this guy's asking me questions about the voices and he's really upsetting me. And I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with these kind of questions. All they do is upset me. So I got pulled up before the psychiatrist and told, you will not do this. You're upsetting my patients. These voices are hallucinations. They're not real. And all you're doing is reinforcing the reality of their hallucinations.
That's a good double bind to get you never to ask them ever a question.
Right. So you can't question them about that. And one of the bylaws or secret laws of the psych hospital was you do not upset a psychotic for any reason if you can possibly help it. Because you never know what they're going to do.
Yeah.
You don't know whether they've been dumping their meds or dumping them down the banister or flushing them down the toilet. You just don't want to risk it. But I found out later, and I didn't know why they got upset when I asked them about the voices, but it was the voices telling them to get rid of me and don't answer any questions. I found that out years later, but I went for years without knowing why they got upset at these questions. Because normal people don't, hey, other patients, you ask them about their symptoms, they'll tell you. But you ask, one of the main symptoms of a paranoid schizophrenic is the voices. And they've never been studied by psychiatry or psychology. They're treated as not real. And I started off treating them that way too, but found out soon as a schizophrenic patient felt that I believed that they were hallucinations, they would clam up. I wouldn't get anything more out of them. If I gave them the benefit of the doubt and listened to them, which none of the other staff were doing, they would start telling me little things. And what I would do is I would accumulate these little nuggets of knowledge. And the next schizophrenic I talked to, I would say, well, okay, I'm not sure what these things are, but I know they do this. They run these patterns. They're always negative, and throw that in. And when they saw that somebody understood, they would give more information. And it was a process of collecting more and more information about these voices and how they operated until I knew more than they did about them. And that blew their minds, back when, and when it got...
What you're saying here is that these voices, well, like you said, have well-defined and predictable destructive patterns. I mean, that's something that you just kind of said, but it just struck me so hard. I'm like, wait a minute. That means that if it's not the patient, this is something outside of the patient that is affecting each and every one of them in the same pattern. That's shocking.
Well, I was in denial at the time. it's kind of like, I didn't want to believe in demons. I didn't want to believe that these were separate. I thought they were part of the guy's subconscious, so I'm kind of thinking that. And here's all this kind of stuff coming up. What I thought at the time is, if they run patterns, they can't be hallucinations, because hallucinations are random. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. They're all over the place. There's no pattern to a hallucination. They're just all over the place. These weren't. So the question that came through my mind is, if there is a predictable negative pattern to these things, they're not hallucinations, then what are they?
Right.
And they won't even look at that, because there was no study done on the voices. The major symptom of paranoid schizophrenia, not a single study was ever done on that. It was just all blown off. And then they reverted to the drug stuff again. So, the pharmaceutical industry, once they saw that drugs worked for this, they started publishing all over the place that, this is a chemical imbalance theory. So, let me see what else, some of these publications here.
Yeah, because this is huge, honestly. I mean, we talk about things on this show about demonic possession, or even how Project Bluebeam is intended to channel demons through your television, how demons could be coming up through Wi-Fi. But now we have a 35-year professional in the field that you're showing us that this is an outside entity that has a clear and well-defined, and I know in the second hour we're going to get deeper into a lot of that pattern that is just, it's mind-blowing as we start to take this all in, because we look at witchcraft, we look at secret society, magical rituals, we look at all this high strangeness, but you've seen it. You've actually, spoken with demons.
Well, yeah, I had, and I did that for a period of time, and not all of them are demons. Some of them I'm getting off of the chemical imbalance thing here, but there were two cases I remember. One was and this was later when I was in the prison, and the prison was a totally different environment. A psychotic patient complaining to the warden about a psychiatrist asking him about the voices wouldn't even break the ambient noise level of that place. They wouldn't even listen to something like that.
Right.
Where they would in the in the psychiatric institutions, where you don't upset these guys. I mean, the prisons where most all these guys ended up once they shut down the state hospital, and at a cost much higher than running the state hospital, because now they got to provide security for them. So, it's a mess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, it's just a chemical imbalance, and a little dye poison ought to take care of that. If not, we'll strap you to a post and, sling you around till you're dizzy enough to not do anything.
So we were talking about the chemical imbalance with depression, and here's some more. It says, the chemical imbalance theory presumed that serotonin, a neurotransmitter in the brain, was below normal levels and therefore caused anxiety and depressive disorders. In the case of depression, the available supply of chemical messenger is low. So this is what they're telling the people. This is from the Lexapro website. So here they are actually publishing on the Lexapro website, the drug company that manufactures this poison, and telling people, in the case of depression, the available supply of chemical messengers is low, so the nerve cells can't communicate effectively. It's low based on what? All these measurements they have to measure these, that they don't even know what the serotonin level of the brain should be. They have no idea. And they're publishing this horse hockey. It's unbelievable.
Well, they always make sure to say it will help some, maybe. And they got that lawyer speak all written in those things. Some people find that this might have some sort of maybe effects of happening,
Yeah. And it might have these side effects. It might kill you.
Oh, well, the side effects we're sure of here.
Yeah. And you notice how they speak those real quick. And the side effect,
Oh, yeah.
neuroleptic syndrome, the brain damage, but in the background is a picture of this happy guy smiling and
Exactly.
having
The video never has
I tell
anything
you,
to do with it.
oh, these drug companies, they're out of friggin' control.
And then it's always actor portrayal, you know. It's
Yeah.
a little actor portrayal at the bottom. Like, this isn't even the person. Like, you know, I got this.
It's just a
It's
script.
not really a doctor. It's not really a patient. Yeah.
Here's the one for Paxil on the Paxil website. So here's the chemical industry again going, oh, this is a chemical imbalance. It's not your fault, but we have something that'll help you. They don't say it's not a cure. They don't say it prevents you from finding your own answers. They say, oh, this will numb you out and make you feel better. Okay, it says on the Paxil website, scientific evidence suggests that depression and certain anxiety disorders may be caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain.
Yeah, logic dictates, folks, that is BS.
Right.
If you study logic, you know darn well you're being given a haka-hooey there.
That's a haka-hooey. I mean, Paxil is associated with, suicidal thoughts. I mean, in adolescence especially. It says Paxil CR helps balance your brain's chemistry. Based on what? Nothing. They have nothing. Absolutely friggin' nothing. This is selling billions of dollars of drugs. And I have the exact amount here somewhere, but it's in the billions. And then it goes on. Just as cake recipe requires you to use flour, sugar, and baking powder, all you morons out there, listen to us. In the right amounts, your brain needs a fine chemical balance in order to perform at its best.
Oh my God.
A chemical imbalance that they have no friggin' idea what it is.
But your brain's just like baking a cake. Don't worry.
And they don't know how these drugs work either. For 10 years after they were discovered, they had no idea how they worked. None. Oh, but the drug companies, now they know it's a chemical imbalance. And listen to this horse hockey. Serotonin, one of the major brain transmitters, works to keep the messages moving smoothly, all you morons who don't understand biochemistry, and we do. However, if serotonin levels become too unbalanced, communication may become disrupted and lead to depression and anxiety. So take our pills, which have all these nasty side effects, which we're not going to tell you about. This is all written by the drug industry. The tie between depression and serotonin led scientists to an interesting find. They don't give you any research results. They don't tell you how the research was formulated. They don't tell you they paid for it. Scientists believe people with depression could have an imbalance of serotonin in their brain. Zoloft, here's another one of their super drugs that they're making millions and millions from. Zoloft helps fix this chemical imbalance. It helps nerve cells send messages to each other the way they normally should. Oh my God, it's such horse hockey. I can't friggin' believe it. Heavy marketing by the pharmaceutical companies not only popularized the chemical imbalance theory, but also their medications used to restore the faulty imbalance. Over time, this theory gained momentum and became almost accepted fact. And this is all propaganda from the drug industry. The drug industry also controls the medical schools, along with the medical mafia. So you think the way they want you to, and back in the 1930s, they shut down all the medical schools who didn't teach a drug pharmaceutical approach. Electrotherapy, along with the Kessler violet ray went, naturopathy went, acupuncture went. None of the medical schools were allowed to teach any of these alternative health treatments, even though acupuncture has been around for tens of thousands of years. And if it didn't work, people wouldn't be using it. So
So we're talking about hundreds of millions of people that believe they have a chemical imbalance in order to produce these billions of dollars for the pharmaceutical companies.
Yes, and here is the exact amount. Effexor, Lexapro, Zoloft, they're all popular antidepressants, were in the top 40 best-selling medications in the world in 2006 and accounted for a combined total of over $8.5 billion in drug sales during that year. 90.5% of respondents said that their doctor or mental health professional wanted to prescribe medication for their anxiety or depression disorder. 71.5% of respondents to this big survey they did said their doctor or mental health professional told them that their disorder was caused by a chemical imbalance of the brain. They're perpetuating this lie and making an absolute fortune out of it. So you ask, over the last 10 years, independent research it's continually shown that the chemical imbalance theory is false. Furthermore, independent research has shown medications to be used to correct the imbalance were largely ineffective, with many faring no better than a placebo. And I remember talking to one psychiatrist at the state hospital once, asking, in one of the conversations, like, why did these drugs work? And he said, well, they really don't work too much better than a placebo. And that shocked me. And I said, well, why don't you just give them sugar pills and save the money? Right. And he said, oh, no, if they found that out, they wouldn't work at all. And I'm like, really? I'm like, well, I can't believe he said that. He said that. It's like, whoa.
Wow. And nobody's going to accept that we actually live in scary, depressing times, and that this overabundance of information and data that we're having shoved at us like no other society has ever had to deal with. If we're talking about 2006, I mean, the world's been pretty much screwed for some
even
time.
Worse.
Yeah. So now the demons are ramping up, and it's their time now, right? It's almost as if they've gotten control. We're coming up on our last 10 minutes, so I wanted to make sure we got everything in.
Well, let me hit on the chemical imbalance here a little bit more. So before we run out, and then we can go next hour into the actual voices.
Yes, good.
Okay, so here, over the last 10 years, independent research has over and over shown that this is bullcrap. All right. So how did this come to be? How did the chemical imbalance theory, which is so untrue, come to be accepted? Well, pharmaceutical research and so-called independent studies, they call these. So you'll read in the newspapers and the Wall Street Journal and all these other places, oh, these independent studies supported the notion of a chemical imbalance and that SSRI medications were effective in resolving this imbalance. Independent studies paid for by them or paid to the universities to find the results that they want, and the results that weren't what they wanted never got published in any reputable journal or ever made the mainstream headlines.
Right.
The results of these studies were published in respected medical journals, these so-called independent studies. Health professionals who read these journals formed their opinions based on what they thought was solid research. Pharmaceutical companies marketed directly to doctors and mental health care professionals using these studies to substantiate their claim. Pharmaceutical companies also aggressively marketed the chemical imbalance notion to the general public. As a result, the chemical imbalance theory became widely accepted, and so did the drugs used to correct it. Marketing was the primary driver between the acceptance of the chemical imbalance theory. American drug companies spend almost twice as much promoting their pills and advertising than on researching and developing new drugs. The Canadian, that was a Canadian study. So it's garbage. The chemical imbalance theory has never been proven. It has no basis in fact. It's been disproven over and over again, and yet these people are throwing it in our face. You turn on the television and you find they're selling illness. If you if you're sick with this, then we got the pill for it. They make up these illnesses, and then the drug industry comes up behind and says, well, we got a pill for it. And I've watched these guys go into the state hospital, and what they would do, and in the ERs too, when I worked in the ERs, they'd come in there and they would give the staff a nice free lunch. And then during the lunch, they would present their clinical graphs and stuff. And then if you look at it, I mean, by the time I got out, I had plenty of statistics under my belt, and the studies were garbage. It was, but here the doctors are buying it, and they're going, hey, here, we'll give you some free samples, try it out, see if it works for you. If so, we'll come back with a truckload for your hospital. I mean,
if we knew what the percentage was of neurochemistry that was necessary, and how many, and what's normal, I mean, how can you even define such a thing? You can't. How can people not even have a base level to rate you by, and then say that there's an imbalance if you don't know what the balance is?
You talk about insanity. That's where it is right there. Then you get into the brain damage that these things cause. So I've got a little bit on that. We can wait until the break if you want to get into that. But they cause a lot of brain damage. They rot out your peripheral nervous system. So.
And again, we're not talking about psychotics here taking these drugs. We're talking about average depressed teenagers and children, and then even depressed parents. We're not talking about just psychotics here. We're talking, this is millions and millions of people.
Well, yeah, for all those other drugs, and then you look at the side effects of those drugs, and you can see for yourself. But what I'll be talking about is the damage done just by the antipsychotic drugs.
Right. Okay.
And what that looks like. And I don't know if you want me to go into that now or whether you want to wait until after the break.
Yeah, we're wrapping up this first hour. It's been amazing. I mean,
wow. An hour went by already.
It's fast, Jerry.
Holy cow.
Yes. Well, we live in a time now where trying to get information out, we got lucky with the World Wide Web, but now they're clamping it down on all of us. Everybody's getting booted off everywhere. I mean, there were thousands purged from Facebook just recently. I've been purged from Facebook for 4 years, but I have a sneaky back door to keep myself in there. And, YouTube almost canceled my channel, demonetized all my videos. iTunes cut almost everybody in this field off, and some of us managed to get back in the back door. You as well, Jerry. I think your YouTube channel, you had some trouble with that too, right?
Well, I had trouble with a link that disappeared, and I'm going, they took it. But Sherry found out that it's still on the website. It was the Robert Stanley interview that disappeared from my computer, and I'm thinking like, they took that. She said
that's what happens. Things just disappear. I noticed that on my channel. There's videos just gone that I didn't, and I don't remember. There's hundreds of videos up there, but then sometimes I'll think of one and go, oh yeah, and then I'll go and it's gone. I don't get notification. Oh, this was violating this, that, or the other. They're just gone.
Well, I got a notification that it was no longer there, but it didn't say why. It just said,
right. No, they don't
this has been taken down. And I mean, they told me that on the screen when I clicked on the link. And
right.
I'm like, well, they didn't say why. They didn't say where they put it, but apparently, Sherry says it's still up in places. So apparently didn't take it down all over.
Right. Well, a lot of things got switched over to private instead of public. Now, this is a huge problem for us, folks, because right now we're set up where we're trying to get massive information out to the public as fast as we can, because we feel that little thread that's been holding this show on the air for so long is fraying. And so I want you all to know that if I ever drop out of the stream, if you're not following me at Freeman TV on Twitter, or the Real Freeman Fly on Facebook, or Freeman TV everywhere else, if I vanish, I'm still going, guys. I'm still over at freemantv.com, still producing content. But they're they're quickly getting us out of the stream, getting us out of the eyesight of people that aren't looking for it, classifying us in horrific ways when all we have is the benefit of mankind in our hands and we're trying to give it out. And it's up to all of you to now support the independent media, because we can't go to these other places. They're cutting us off, guys, left and right. So it's really important now to actually visit the websites and to get over to everybody's website and see what's going on. And I know if you come to freemantv.com, you're going to get deep. I mean, there's deep stuff there, guys. I got, lectures and articles and so much to go on, so much for you to get into this, that you need to get over there and do that, because I highly recommend it.
Oh yeah, they want the whole population dumbed down to be brought under control, just like they did in the state hospitals. They want everybody flooded with drugs, their brains foggy, their emotional state in upheaval.
Yeah.
And people are a lot easier to control when they're drugged up. They can't get to their central core. They can't get to the spiritual level when they're all drugged up.
Well, we're seeing that clearly with what's going on with the attacks on the grand old party and the high strangeness happening from the liberals. Just riots in the streets. They've got people screaming and banging on locked doors, and it's insanity in the streets right now. And these could be side effects. I'm just saying.
Yeah, they had to take some of their own drugs.
I'm no psychiatrist. I know, as if a psychiatrist knew. Well, Jerry Marzinsky is not a psychiatrist. He is a licensed psychotherapist that has been dealing with these psychotics for 35 years, getting deep into it, and has a true insight to what's actually going on. So we're going to get deeper into this as we start to look into some Australians that are actually considering the data that's coming from these psychotics. And then let's go ahead and go high tech, folks, because Tesla got yanked out of there. Maybe we'll find that there were some therapies that could easily deal with this problem that are just not even considered whatsoever and have been written out of history. And we'll certainly find out why the voices don't want to talk about themselves, and get more into that superhuman strength on the other side. So if you're not a member yet, become one now. Do it just to support the show, just to help keep it going, and get all that backlog that you can from freemantv.com. Come on over, click subscribe, get on there, and get the second hour, because you're going to love it. And you're also supporting independent media, keeping this stuff going, because that's the only thing that's going to keep this going. So, well,
we'll have some interesting information about what you can actually do that does work, that, it may be dangerous to the person trying it, but it has proven to work.
Well, this sounds very intriguing. So hold it right there. And I know I'm excited to get into it too. But we got to take this break, folks. And all of you, if you want to get in touch and get a guest offered and get some people on the show, just write producer Steve at freemantv.com. And as usual, you can always write me, Freeman at freemantv.com, and give me any insights that you want. So thank you all so much for tuning in. Oh my God, we're just going to keep going. So I hope you'll come over and subscribe, and I will see you all next week.